There are three different stages of growth in any Meta Ads account. If you're going to scale your Meta Ads account, there are some things that have to happen consistently, no matter if you're spending $100 a month or $1 million a month. And yet, what I have learned from spending a lot of money on a lot of businesses that are a lot of different sizes is that different kinds of problems rise to the forefront of any particular business at any given time, depending on what stage of the journey that they are in. And so what I'm going to lay out for you for the next little while is what those three stages of growth are. And my hope for this episode is for you to begin to locate where you are on the journey so that you can then put your practical problem solving effort into the right place. Because this is one of the things that goes wrong. If you don't know where you are in the sort of process of scaling an account, the process of scaling your brand, you will end up spinning your wheels on the wrong problems. And so if you can identify the right problems to solve, you'll be much better at solving them. And so for the next little while, I want to lay out the three different phases of growth and tell you both what I see as the main problems in those phases, as well as the main ways that you can solve those problems, and hopefully also give you some handles on how you can go about identifying which phase you're in, and maybe you'll kind of find yourself in one of them. Three phases of growth, okay? So phase one, I'm going to call the creative stage, okay? The creative stage. And the creative stage is where the number one problem you have to solve for your brand is actually generating some semblance of what I'll call product market fit or creative success. Those two are really hand in hand. It's possible that your brand actually is in this stage because it's not clear that there's product market fit yet. So that may be the problem. Or it may be that you have what is basically product market fit. Like you've acquired some customers somehow or another. There's some reason to believe maybe you've achieved 6 figures in revenue. It's actually really hard to generate 6 figures in revenue without some level of product market fit. So you've got some baseline level of your business where you've established product market fit, or maybe you're still trying to figure that out. Okay. And you have to now figure out what kind of creative is going to propel my ad account forward. So this is the fundamental problem to solve at this stage of the business is creative. By creative, I don't mean like how do you produce the creative? I mean, what is the angle that sells your product, right? So I've considered starting a brand at different times, and I have run brands that were in 6 figures and tried to grow them. And when we've seen brands be successful from those early stages, the reason they're successful is that we find ads that move with which we can acquire customers at or under our targets. Okay, sort of that simply. So when I was the CEO for Rough 100, at one point we had 6 brands in our portfolio, and those brands ranged from sub $1 million, sometimes sub $500,000, brands we had recently acquired, to brands that were approaching $10 million in revenue, right? Getting to that stage of business. And there was at any given time, I think when we had up to 6, there was like 3 in each of these two categories, okay? Where let's call them cluster 1 was the brands that are in this sort of creative stage, phase 1 of Meta Ads growth. All we're doing is spending as much time as possible trying different ad ideas, as wide-ranging of ad ideas as possible, to see, can any of these work to acquire customers at our target? And this is where like you're just looking to do anything you can creatively. You're thinking about, okay, stills versus videos, UGC versus more produced stuff, or stuff that's a little bit more editing flourish to it, customer generated content, long form explainers, all these different things to see what works, and crucially not just the format of the ad, but the actual content, the actual sales pitch, right? So again, I had a client recently where I was working with them, and we were hoping that we could get to $10 million in revenue across a couple of years. I think that was the timeline that we had hoped for, right? But what we ended up doing was having ads that hit so much that we went from functionally $0 in spend to like a few $100,000 in spend within a few months. That was because we very quickly, much faster than I had forecasted, had we definitely had product market fit. We kind of already knew that, but we found ads that moved the product really, really, really effectively. And because of those ads, suddenly we had a scaled ad account, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. Like we had done it. We had done this thing, and suddenly that $10 million revenue number got moved way up in our timeline, and all of our things changed. Now, I almost never would forecast that's the outcome that's going to happen. And yet, it definitely can, because when you find creative that works, it can be that experience where you go, okay, we have figured out how to sell the product. We've figured out what we need to do. And now we're just like taking off, and spend is growing really fast. And you went from spending $100 or $200 a day, banging your head against the wall, trying to figure out if anything was going to work, till like $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $8,000 a day really fast, as fast as you can keep inventory in stock when you have a moment like that. It is all about, in that scenario, some combination of creative and offer. And then a lot of times, this phase is the most fun in e-commerce if it's working. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating if it's not working. If it's not working, you're probably losing money. Your business isn't really working very well, or you need to find a different acquisition channel or whatever it is. You can really be banging your head against the wall. It can be extraordinarily frustrating. And some of you listening to, watching this are probably in that stage where you're experiencing that. But some of you have probably also experienced the fun part of this stage, because when it happens, it is a wild ride. Everybody is really happy. This time is marked by massive percentage increases in spend as you find things that hit. Everybody looks around and goes, "Oh my gosh, we're selling out of our product so fast!" And and I've just seen that a million times. And certainly that happened to me at 4x400 as well when I was running those brands. Like, some of our brands just like suddenly worked, and we found ads that worked, and we would sell through products and sell out, and didn't even know, you hit the right moment, the right combo of seasonality and creative and all those things, and it would just work. So that's what phase one is. If you are in this phase, your job, especially if you're the CEO or if you're the founder of the company, right? It means you're probably pretty small. You don't have a very big team, and your job becomes, how do I do everything I can, put every resource I possibly can? If I'm really going to use Meta to grow this brand, how do I do everything I can to find creative that works? And this is often a messaging problem first, as I said. What is the thing that is going to sell your product to somebody? Don't forget that if you're running Meta ads, you're in direct response advertising. You're in performance marketing. That means you need to think like a performance marketer, like a direct response advertiser. In some ways, like the best people to look at occasionally, or at least some of the time, like, don't go pull up Nike's ad account, right? They're doing something very different than what you are doing. Go, even if you're in the same space, even if you're selling athletic shoes and athletic apparel or whatever, right? Instead, go look at, the classic examples are like David Ogilvy or Eugene Schwartz. Like, go look at people who are trying to get you to pull your wallet out and buy something right now. Go look at infomercials. Now, not that your ads exactly have to work like that, but watch what they're doing to think about that. If you are in a phase where you really are struggling to get somebody to take their wallet out and make a purchase decision right now, your ads just will not scale. Think really carefully about what your messaging is going to be. This often starts with words, not images. But I will say that if you are following the other things that I'm saying in this, in my podcast, and you are running manual bids and building your ad account like that, you should also take basically anything you can and shove it into the ad account. So again, I talked to a brand recently who had been paying attention to some of my content, and they were selling headwear, and they said it worked. Like, we did it suddenly, right? Like, we just kept recording explainer videos of the founder talking about the product and what makes this headwear different or better or whatever. And I don't even remember what the features were or the benefits were of the product, but he just kept trying. He just took shot after shot after shot after shot, grabbed his phone, just recorded video after video, showing the product, explaining it, talking about what the offer was, all those things, putting it into the ad account. And at some point, bam, something clicked. And now they had initial stage of success. Now, you have to replicate that a few times before you're out of this stage, right? One ad is not going to make your whole brand. You have to do that a few extra times, but that's usually about finding the messaging that works. And this gets you to, like I said, a couple 100,000, 300,000 in spend per month, averaged out, could be more, could be less, depending on seasonality, depending on how big your brand and your niche is and all those kinds of things, right? But you get the idea. And once you get that first one or two of them, you will probably find that you can start to produce a few more of them. Because you found the angle that works, and now you just got to go recreate it with different assets, etc. So there's number one. Now, what I just said at the end there implies what stage two is. If stage one is the creative stage, stage two is the operational stage. At this point, what happens is now you've found messaging that works. You found angles that work. Now your brand is growing. You're starting to produce a little bit more money. You have the ability to generate more content probably. And your job now is to create as much more of that ad content as possible. And this is where I think there is a real benefit to volume output. Literally just like, how much creative can I make and how diverse of creative assets can I make? All while hitting your core talking points, right? Using the things you learned in stage one to now increase your output of production. And so now the problem shifts from being a creative problem to an operational problem, because it's not really about messaging per se anymore. It's about scaling up your ability to produce content that communicates that messaging. And that is actually a really different skill set, and it's really hard. I personally sort of hate doing operational and process work. I can do it okay. It's not that I'm completely incompetent at it, but I'm not very good at it. It's not natural to me, and it feels like going for a run in the mud to me, just like the world is just working against me. I just hate it. Okay. And so if I was to be in that stage of the brand, what I would need to do is go now work in a bunch of, like, this is where you're getting deep in the weeds of Asana or ClickUp or whatever you use to do project management, right? And this is where you're starting to think about all the different kinds of output you can create. This is where you're adding designers and video editors to your team, right? Like in my case, for our clients, this is where we've worked with more staffing to add folks from the Philippines to build up my ability to output these things. We have process for our clients. All of my clients right now are somewhere in this stage or in the next one, okay? Our job is to figure out how to use the tools at our disposal to generate as much output as possible around that core messaging. So you're adding designers, still image designers, you're adding video editors maybe to your team. You might be doing influencer seeding to generate a huge amount more content from influencers. You might be getting customer generated content from customers like CGC, right? Like post-purchase video where you're asking people to review the product. You might be employing a third-party creative agency who's doing additional work for you to scale up your output. You might be thinking more about like just all kinds of types of creative that you aren't doing right now and go like, oh, we need to add another copywriter or another person to do brief ads or another whatever to keep expanding the diverse volume of assets that you want and try to get as much creative as possible into the ad account. And at the same time, you also may be employing somebody on your team to do landing page iterations, offer changes, those kinds of things to test those alongside your creative. Here's the key idea. Everything that I just said, every single one of those things requires creating process and budget and timelines and all those things for, right? If you want to do influencer seeding, here are the steps involved. You need to give somebody the job of influencer seeding. That person needs to identify influencers you want to work with. That person needs to reach out to the influencers, get them to opt in to receiving your products. You need to then send them the products. You need to make sure you get the right products and send it to them. You need to see how many of them post. You need to monitor those posts, collect the content. Somebody has to build the content in the ad account. You probably want to maintain a relationship with some of the people, especially the ones who do a great job. You want to measure the performance of some of them so you know who to keep working with and who not. Like that's a lot of different things. It's a very process intensive thing, even if it's not particularly expensive. And I don't think it is actually. It's just got a lot of stages. This is where like a great influencer agency can be really helpful, right? They have identified ways to smooth out that very friction-filled process. And you can repeat that same thing. Like, let's say you want to just triple the amount of output that your own team has. And this is key, by the way. So much of the way you actually scale an ad account is just with creative volume. It's not just like with new, like good assets. It's about the ability to like in the beginning stages, it's about like find a winner, right? Find a winner and let that scale. And the ad account a lot of times will look like one ad that powers the whole account forward. Okay, but like it's possible, like I think a lot of times in stage 2, your ad account is sort of less top heavy. I've heard actually mixed things about this. I know some people still see really top heavy ad accounts over time where it's, what I mean by that is one ad that's producing 60% of the spend or something like that, especially if you're running manual bids and the bids are just surfacing winners and suppressing losers. And so all the energy of the account goes towards one ad. Like that can still happen. But at least in my accounts right now, what I'm seeing is even in my top spending accounts, like or even in my top spending campaigns, like one ad's producing 15% of the spend. And that's the top spending ad. Okay. So I'm trying to layer on asset after asset, creative after creative, trying to get as many different pieces in there as possible to reach as many different people as possible. So if we can accomplish that, then what do we have to do? Well, we have to scale up the output. And now if I want to get a second graphic designer, I have to figure out which graphic designer gets what work. And I have to have a process for that. And if I want to brief those graphic designers to generate static images, I have to find inspiration for those, and I have to brief those, and I have to, again, get them built in the ad account, and so on, right? And somebody has to report back to somebody else in the business about how much you're spending and how it's going and what the return's going to be. And there's forecasting is probably involved. And this is another thing, right? The financial infrastructure gets harder to build in the early stages before you have true PMF, before you're starting to grow. What you might find is that like a forecast is only marginally helpful. It's going to be really wrong anyway. So like you take the scenario I mentioned earlier, it's impossible to forecast. Impossible to forecast going from essentially $0 in spend to $300,000 to spend in 5 months or whatever. Your forecast is worthless at that point, right? It's broken. It's just not going to be useful at all. Okay. But at some point, your spend gets less volatile, less crazy. The wild ride you experience in those early days and all the fun of it, actually, sometimes the feeling changes. Now it actually feels a little bit more like running or swimming upstream, where you can still do it, but it's really, really hard work because you have to keep putting all of this stuff in there. Now, if this goes right, you can keep expanding spend for a very long time. You can keep growing spend for a very long time, and it can keep working. So sometimes the wins here feel smaller. Sometimes they actually still keep coming, as you scale up your output, right? It's not necessarily the case that you're going to slow down your percentage of spend increase over time, because you may actually keep finding new wins. Maybe having this process allows you to go develop more products, because now you're the operator, you're not just the marketer anymore, and you've got a lead growth person or an agency or whatever it is that can do this thing for you. And so now your time is freed up to go develop more products, and you give the products to the agency and they're producing more stuff, etc. Right? You get the idea. And so that can push the spend really far forward. But the complexity that comes with doing this is real. And that's why the problem becomes an operational problem to solve. So much of it is about, here's the way we solve it, right? What we do is we get a forecast and we say, here's what we think is possible, what we should be able to do. What are we going to need to do that? How much content are we going to need to produce? Like, how many cameras are we going to need to pick up? And then how many ads are we going to be able to spin out from that? And broadly, right? I don't need to precisely forecast exactly how many ads you need, but are we going to be able to produce enough ads to support that level of spend? If we can't, then what do we need to add to produce it? If we can, then how do we actually get it done? And now you're communicating every week. How's it going relative to our forecast? Do we need to adjust our forecast? Did we over forecast or under forecast? Do we need to adjust our targets weekly so that, okay, now we have too much inventory, we need to take a lower return so we can turn that inventory back into cash, etc. There's all these conversations. And so the way you solve this problem is with a good forecast, a well-considered forecast, a good and careful plan where you're forecasting all the way down through the entire P&L based on cohorts. And then you're building team relative to how much money you have available relative to that forecast to output as much as you possibly can. And then you keep growing it over time. This also requires typically, like I said, project management software, et cetera, and some strategic intelligence about where the next best effort is for your team's time and dollars in terms of which kind of creative you want to invest in next, right? Like, again, customer generated content versus something you design versus influencer content versus whatever else. Okay. So there's some strategic sense of like, where's the next place that we can, where's the next domino that can fall, that can open up the one after that. Okay. Push down the one after that. But again, this is mostly a process problem. The way you know you're in that stage, right, is that you have seen some success. You've probably gotten to the 6 figures in spend, somewhere around there, high 5 figures and six figures in spend, maybe even 200,000 a month, something like that. And now the goal is, okay, but you're seeing probably seeing a slowdown in the percentage increase of your spend. It's not quite such a wild ride, and now you have to put your head down here. This is the mistake. The mistake in this stage of growth is to start looking at other channels. And this is very often where people start doing this. They diversify too early because these operational problems are not problems they see very clearly. They think they still have a creative problem. Their new creative that they launch isn't pushing their spend forward as much as when they were in stage 1. And so now they're in stage 2, and new creative might help a little, but it's just not doing the same thing. And now they're going like looking around, going like, okay, we gotta stop being so reliant on this one channel or whatever else. And that's the mistake to avoid here. The mistake is to think that you have to go diversify your spend as the next stage. Actually, this is a stage where I think because it gets harder to manage and because there's more process, it actually typically requires more focus, but just in some different ways than it did the first time. Okay. And so that's a mistake. If you're sub 20 million in revenue, there's probably at least some element at which this is a stage you are still in. You may be getting towards stage 3 now, and I'll tell you what stage 3 is in a second. But probably if paid media has been a part of your journey and you're sub 20 million in revenue, it's very likely that in some way or another, that you are still in this stage and you need to keep focusing and keep solving more of these problems. And you probably haven't really reached total diminishing returns yet on increased focus, increased creative production, etc. There's probably more spend to be had. I mentioned it in this episode, but my own work with clients has required me to staff up a creative team to generate more creative at more volume. We work with our brands. We are usually producing between 5 and 25 variants of every ad concept that we produce because we want creative volume and creative diversity to generate the output that we want. To do that, I have hired my entire design and video editing team from the Philippines via my friends at More Staffing. And that's because they do very, very good work, and I can pay them a really good wage, attract really good talent. One of my designers worked at a major international magazine as a graphic designer in the Philippines before working with me. She has an incredible resume, and I found her through More Staffing, and she now leads my graphic design team, and we're starting to put production designers underneath her, and she does an awesome job. I can pay her really good money relative to what is available to her in the Philippines, less money than I would pay that same person in the US, she wins, the business wins, the bottom line wins, and ultimately, in this case, the client wins because we're able to deliver really great work that produces creative that sells products. You should go staff up your team, whether it's on the design and marketing side of the business, or whether it's supply chain and operations and process and all of those kinds of things in an e-commerce business. You'll find incredible talent, people with great resumes in the Philippines via More Staffing. Go to morenow.co/AF, morenow.co/AF to go work with my friends at More Staffing. Go find incredible talent from the Philippines for your business today. Stage 3, I'm going to call the measurement stage. This is another thing that people get to too early. They think they have a measurement problem when they're mostly on Meta. Like I said, 0 to 20 million. If you're focusing mostly on Meta, you might have some Google spend in there, some influencer spend that's sort of separate from Meta or whatever, but you can normally see pretty clearly that Meta is the driver of your growth, and therefore spending your time on incrementality and attribution tools and things like this is just a waste. This is the reason why for a long time, a while back I recorded an episode called "You Don't Need an Attribution Tool," because the vast majority of brands don't. They're too small. It just doesn't matter. Your Meta Ads dashboard is good enough. The tool isn't telling you anything specific. Just let the Meta Ads dashboard allocate spend towards the best performers according to your attribution settings and your optimization settings, and go from there. You don't actually need a third-party tool to measure this. But at some point, complexity in the business enters in a way where measurement becomes a lot harder. And it happens in two ways. The first is with additional ad channels. So at some point, maybe you say, you know what, we do want to bring in other channels here. We want to get more serious. And maybe it's something as simple as, in the early stages, your Google spend is entirely search and shopping, but you're going to move some more to PMax, which is a little harder to measure. Now there's video and image assets and display and YouTube in there in a way that's a little bit trickier. Or maybe you're just spending on YouTube and you're not really sure if it's working. You don't trust the number in the Google dashboard, but it's also like you don't know which way to not trust it. Maybe it's over-reporting, maybe it's under-reporting. It's hard to see what the audiences are. Everything about it feels a little bit harder. And so you start to wonder, like, wait a minute, is this actually working? Now, look, there's never going to be a point where your bank account isn't the ultimate attribution source. Stated positively, if you're making money in some way or another, it is working, okay? So that's ultimately the true indicator of truth. And if you've gotten 20 million in revenue, you probably have some sense of what your new customer revenue is divided by your spend, your AMER, we call it, right? Your acquisition marketing efficiency ratio. That number probably is somewhat intuitive to you. So if you're at 10 million and your AMER is 1.5, okay, if you get to 20 million and your AMER goes up to 2, and at the same time as that's happened, you spent a lot more on YouTube. Well, YouTube probably caused that. Okay. And so at that point, the attribution tool may or may not be that important to you. But somewhere at some point, it may be the case that some incrementality or attribution testing may be useful to you somewhere along this journey. Like I said, probably north of 20 million is the place where you need to start thinking about this. And really, I bet it's closer to 50 for a lot of brands. It's just, you can just get really, really far in stage 2. And like I said, the trap in stage 2 is to think that you need to start diversifying your spend sooner. In fact, if you just stay focused, you can go, again, very, very far. Go listen to my episode with Jack Rubin and listen to him talk about how much he focused on one channel for how long, and he's going to get to 50 million. Like, it's just like, and just in the UK, right? He said there's a quarter of the audience that you have in the US. So you can get really far doing that. But at the same time, there is some point at which there is additional complexity from different channels, and having some kind of measurement may be useful to you at that stage. Maybe. It may be useful to you somewhere in there. Especially once you get towards 9 figures, D2C, et cetera, then it's like, having some additional tools really doesn't cost you that much relative to the revenue that you're making, and you may as well start to bring some of those in and see what they say. But there's actually another way where measurement becomes more of a problem. You're scaling up, you've got the messaging that works, you've got serious product market fit, you've got great operational process around focusing and outputting lots and lots of meta ads to grow and grow and grow that channel, and that's great. But what happens when you introduce another sales channel? It's a significant part of your business, right? Typically that starts with Amazon, but it also might include brick and mortar. What happens when suddenly you sell into Target or into Walmart or into, I don't know, Home Depot or Best Buy or whatever, whatever is your niche, whatever you're in, one of these large brick and mortar retailers where suddenly for a fact that they are probably that your ads, even your conversion-based ads, are doing something to generate some kind of sell-through in the rest of your business. And yet, at the same time, it's really hard to see what that connection is. Now, this becomes a big challenge because, and I've seen this happen. I talked to somebody a long time ago who was saying that they added brick and mortar, their D2C business, their D2C ROAS tanked They were in major. It was Target. They added Target. Their D2C business looked a whole lot worse, and so suddenly the performance in their D2C business, their ROAS went way down, and so they pulled back spend. And what happened? Their Target sell-through also got way worse, and they almost destroyed the business doing it, because it turns out that their D2C spend was actually powering the whole thing. And they probably got sophisticated and added some, reach spend and YouTube awareness spend and whatever else, right? They start adding other channels to do these things. But this becomes a much bigger challenge at that point in the game. And it's fair at that point to say, okay, let's bring in some other tools and see what we can do to get some more sophisticated measurement. Now, this isn't a different problem than Stage 2. At this point, you probably have Stage 2 humming, right? You've got a creative team outputting a lot of stuff all the time, and maybe they're still working on it and finding ways to do more and more assets at more and more volume. And maybe if you're making more and more money, you can bring in bigger influencers and take bigger whatever, right? All those things can all be part of that process. But Stage 3, this measurement process comes in. The mistake in Stage 3 is to think you're there too early. Again, many people actually, there's two mistakes. One of them is to think you're there too early. People think they're there when they're actually not yet. The second one is to not recognize that this is happening in your business. It's to start to think wait a minute, like I said, the example I gave where they sold into Target and suddenly their D2C ROAS looked worse, right? It's a big mistake to pull back your spend there. It can really, really hurt you, even though it's harder to measure. But just look in your dashboard, look in your meta ads dashboard and look at the thousands, tens of thousands. If you're in Stage 3, 20 million plus, right? In revenue, you're probably getting hundreds of thousands of clicks that are not resulting in a purchase on your website. Those mean something for your brand's awareness, for people to know who you are, for people to walk into a major retailer like Target in that example and see who you are on the shelf and have had now an experience with the brand and understand what it is and be able to pick it up and look at it and get your questions answered by seeing what the packaging looks like or the product looks like or whatever, right? All those things can happen. So that's the mistake, is to potentially pull back your spend too early because you don't realize that it's accomplishing more. And that's where, again, potentially more sophisticated measurement can be a big difference maker. I know, for example, last I had checked, the large incrementality tools out there were costing roughly 10 grand a month or something like that to use. And that makes sense, right? Because that their customer is a much bigger customer than just your average, $5 million Shopify brand or whatever it is, right? Not to sound condescending about that. To build a $5 million brand is incredibly impressive, but yeah, that's not who that company is targeting at that point, because it's just too obvious. They just don't need the help. Here's the question for you: which stage are you in? Which problem do you need to solve next? Are you at a place right now where you need to get the fundamentals of media buying, you need to solve your creative problem, you need to solve your offer problem, and then start pushing spend towards that? Or are you at a place where you've actually got some of those things down, and now the game is, how do I get more creative and more output going so that I can scale this thing up and grow my spend? Or are you at a stage where you actually are now starting to see a more multi-channel, more complex business, and you need to think more about measuring differently and being able to understand those things? Which stage are you in? Answering that question correctly is the way to understand exactly where to put your effort next, or as exactly as possible, where to put your effort next. And that, by solving the right problem next, you will generate the largest impact on your business. Thanks so much, as always, for watching or listening to this episode. If it was helpful to you, the number one way you can say thanks to me is by sharing it with somebody else for whom you also think it might be helpful. You can also, of course, subscribe to this wherever you are watching or listening to it. I'm playing with all kinds of different things right now in terms of editing and intros and outros and all that stuff. If you have any feedback for anything that you've noticed that I've been doing, I would be so grateful for it. You can email me, podcast@ajfgrowth.com. You can also reach out to me on Twitter @AndrewJFerris, or see everything that I'm doing, or if you want to work with me in some capacity, go to ajfgrowth.com, fill out the form there, and let's get talking about what's possible. Don't forget to go to see my sponsor, More Staffing. Virtual assistants can be helpful. Virtual professionals can change your business. I love More Staffing. You will love working with them. Go to morenow.co/AF to get working with them today. Thanks so much for watching and listening. I'll talk to you next time.